Last night there was an amazing moon, full moon. I don't know if you got the chance to see it in the UK, but here in Sardinia, last night there was an amazing moon, full moon.
So did you hear an echo there? Keep going.
Yeah. Actually, the full moon rose already around 5 o'clock.
Oh.
And as I was driving back from the beach to my hometown here in Sardinia, the moon, this huge full moon accompanied me all the way back home. It was really amazing. It was very special full moon, the one we had yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Moons. Tell me about the moon. What's the importance of, what function does the moon play in one's spiritual life, if we think in those terms?
Well, especially in the female, part of ourselves plays a big role.
Yes.
We know that we both have a female and male part in ourselves, no matter whether we are women or men or whatever gender we are. And the moon is definitely connected to our female part. Certainly the moon is deeply connected to the female reproductive cycle, and but also, women can be, I was, for instance, yesterday I was quite sensitive. I could feel the full moon within me. I could feel the power of the moon within me. And it's beautiful to connect oneself to the energy of the moon and even the sun. And it's something that I think many human beings, and especially academics.
Well, I was just going to say, the way you're talking, anyone who doesn't know you, just by way of very quick introduction, this is Dr. Antonella Diana. She's a Marie Curie Fellow at the Department of Asian and North African Studies at Foscari University of Venice. She holds a PhD in social anthropology from the Australian National University, and she currently completed a Marie Curie project at Foscari on the theme of urbanization in China's southwestern borderland. So anyone who is just tuning in and has just heard Dr. Antonella Diana talking about the moon, you may be surprised to hear that she is a hardcore academic at the same time. But of course, as far as I'm concerned, as far as Dr. Antonella is concerned, as we will soon hear, the two need not be mutually exclusive. The academic study of things need not be divorced from a deeper kind of spiritual engagement with things. And we're sort of entitling, this was based on Antonella's suggestion, we're entitling this discussion Re-Enchanting the Academy, or Re-Enchanting Academia. So could you say a little bit, tell me a little bit about yourself and what kind of attitude you bring to your own life, not only, but to your work, please.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Hassan, for inviting me to have this conversation with you on this topic.
It's my pleasure, and it's my deep pleasure. And Antonella and I are good friends, and we actually met. We don't have to go. We can mention later how we met, and sort of in a non-academic context. But I hold Antonella in very high regard, and as you will find, the viewers and listeners, that she's a deeply thoughtful, deeply intelligent, of course. It almost goes without saying if someone has a PhD that they're intelligent, but intelligent in a more kind of integrated sense, which is the type of intelligence that we're sorely lacking, especially amongst academics, especially amongst the kind of movers and shapers of the world. Anyway, I don't want to hog the mic. Please continue.
Well, where should I start? Well, I've always had, since I was very young, a profound interest and curiosity about Asia. Even when I was a child, some people actually, because of my features, would tell me that, oh, you look very Asian. And at the age of 15, I knew already that I wanted to study Chinese language. I wanted to go to China. And I wanted to study, to know more about Asian cultures in general. So there was the year of the 1989 when the Tiananmen Square Revolution happened. And that's when I decided that I wanted that event had a huge impact on my life. And it's because of that, because of, the interest that I had instilled in me, in knowing more about China, the Chinese political situation at the moment, that I had, decided to go into studying Chinese and Asian studies. I take Asian studies as my main subject at the university. So 4 years later, I enrolled in a bachelor's degree at Foscari University of Venice, the same department where I'm currently based. And so I started exploring Chinese culture at large, because it was a quite holistic way of learning about China, starting from language to philosophy, literature, history, all different aspects of, even we studied even classical Chinese. But the most fascinating aspect for me was, this became clear towards the end of my degree, I was very interested in learning more about contemporary life and the contemporary aspects of Chinese culture, rather than, more the classical and the historical aspects. And in particular, I was very much interested in minority ethnic groups culture that I had been exposed to on my first trip to China in 1995. In 1995, I studied in Beijing, and then with some friends, we took a train and went to the southwestern borderlands of China, which have been basically the focus of my research ever since. And but of course, at that time, I just had very little training in anthropology. I was still quite naive, and I would say even quite romantic. So I had quite a romantic view about, otherness. I was kind of genuinely interested in getting to know about, of course, these exotic cultures. But it was more about learning otherness to probably better understand who I am. And this is how later on I actually came into postgrad studies, in anthropology. And before that, after I completed my degree, I actually became interested in Southeast Asian culture, because I was at the border between China and Laos. And so I finished my degree, and to do that, I had to do some fieldwork research, which was very unusual for an undergraduate student to go and live, somewhere else in the middle of nowhere in China, not far from the border with Burma and Laos. So I wrote my dissertation, and after that, I decided to live in Laos on my own for about 5 months to study Lao language. And this came after I had traveled to Laos between 1999 and 2000, when I was living in China. And I felt a very deep connection with the people in Laos. I was just in love. I fell in love with the country. I fell in love with the energy of the country. I was a kind of an uneducated anthropologist could say, let's say, or not enough trained anthropologists at the time. And to be honest, as I went on with my studies and I became more professionally trained in anthropology, I started to miss that kind of connection, the kind of deep connection that came originally really from within. They had brought me to, to deepen my study of Lao culture, Lao language. And
would it be fair to say that, I really appreciate that kind of the way you described, your own intellectual sort of evolution, as it were, how you came to your topic of study and things like that, and the sort of original innocence of inquiry that you had before the quote unquote formal training at the graduate level, which, and what I'm hearing, and having talked to you previously about this on different occasions, a number of different occasions, my sort of understanding is that the formal education almost disenchanted you vis-a-vis the topic of your concern. I mean, you mentioned that you originally had this deep connection, you were passionate. It was almost like this childlike wonder that you had, right? And we've also had occasion to talk about this separately. Oh, I need to click this mic on. So all this time, it wasn't me talking, it was my orchid talking. But I don't know what my orchid was saying. Hopefully he or she made sense. What I was going to say is that there's some very serious people who have been arguing for some time now, and it doesn't really take a huge leap of the imagination to realize this, that in our own lives, the kind of openness that we had as children, all children, by the way, are deeply creative, right? It's actually when they learn how to formally draw, that all of a sudden, to take drawing as one illustrative example, that all of a sudden they think, oh my God, I have to draw in a certain way, I have to think in a certain way, I have to be a certain way. It's the same with the educational model. But please continue. This is very, very important, what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, in the sense that when I was doing my training in anthropology, I remember the methodology classes, preparing to do field work. I spent at least 10 months before heading to the border between China and Laos to do my field work. All the training was focused on how we have to learn to take a distance from the object of our studies, about not to identify too much in the subject you were actually going to explore and trying to make sense of and find the meaning of. And also, and this is peculiar to anthropologists, that you have, because anthropologists, I think, have some sort of probably inferiority complex. They're always trying to assert themselves, assert their place within the social sciences. So you have to somehow find a way to differentiate yourself from sociologists and from cultural studies scholars and from journalists. There's always this thing, you remember, you're not a journalist. You must go into the field having theoretical framework in your mind, having certain questions in your mind. You're not a traveler. You're not going to write a travelogue. You'll have to write an ethnography, and ethnographies are quite different to travelogues. And so you are trained to rationalize your whole, the way you approach, the way you relate to other human beings. And this is what I found a little bit, one of the first signs of disenchantment, where exactly this was the beginning of the training. Because when I went to the field after this training, I felt something really had changed, that I always like to keep in my mind that, yes, I have to relate to other human beings. I'm here to study this phenomenon, but I have to, try and keep distance be objective, because if you don't have enough distance, you won't be able to portray reality in the most objective way. And so and I struggle with this. When I was in the field, the first field work, which is obviously it's a kind of an initiation. It's a rite of passage for anthropologists. Your first, field work during your PhD was really a very profound, very strong, even personal experience, like the existential experience for me. I started questioning, okay, who am I to be here?
Oh, wow.
Why, what right do I have to be here, to be interacting with these people, to learn about the cultures, and then go back home, bring all this, and then write my PhD and build up my career based on their lives. And so the way I tried to kind of bridge this gap between me and the people was actually, okay, I want to try to be as human as possible, rather than just see myself as, I'm the anthropologist. And
if I may pause you very quickly, that's a very, very important, these are all very, very important points you're making, that this point that you just made, you would know better than me. Could you speak a little bit to how anthropologists, certain not maybe anthropology as such, one could argue, but many anthropologists do play the role of I'm not going to get the language right here, but agents of the state in many ways, and sort of the very language that's used, right? Informants, there's a move, like the people anthropologists, ethnographers interview, right, are informants. Right, I don't think that's accidental, right?
Like if you're working for the CIA, like intelligence.
Right? Who are informants? How weird! Language is language for me, and there's a school of thought, as you know as well as I do, that argues, according to which that language creates our very realities. Right? We think through language. We understand the world through the words and concepts that we have. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to, so the fact that you had this kind of this questioning, innately you had this questioning vis-a-vis the modalities that you're very approached to. I'm the anthropologist studying these foreign cultures, right? Like, to what end? Like, what's the intentionality? But you wanted to bring a humaneness to the work.
Yeah, as I said, I thought that there was, for me, a journey towards self-discovery, but also a journey to collect some knowledge about other life worlds and bring those back to my own, my own world, even if Australia was not really my world. And trying to find, actually, rather than focusing, as many American anthropologists do, focusing on the diversity and cultural differences, but trying to find commonalities across cultures, and find the human kind of universals in this experience, and by meeting and encountering other forms of life. And also, for me, anthropology was a way to somehow, okay, I acquired these notions, this knowledge, but I want this knowledge to be somehow transformative also for other people, not only for myself. So we get to know better who we are as humanity. And
can you say, sorry to pause you again, can you say a little bit about this, what when you use the word transformative? Because usually when academics talk about their sort of the knowledge production, right? The idea is it's essentially kind of, in so many words, it's knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's to kind of, we live in an information age now, right? Have been for some time now. It's like adding to the information. So you have, Google, it's like scanning all the books. So it's like, consciously or unconsciously, we're just kind of adding to the world library that's available. But what you're talking about, when you talk about knowledge being transformative, this is a very different, and this is really a very traditional historic understanding of knowledge, that knowledge is supposed to not just inform us, but reform us, right? Reshape us from within. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that nowadays the academic production of knowledge, but also academic teaching, is really mostly based on offering, notions about certain topics. While I believe that the process itself of producing knowledge, but also delivering knowledge to other people, should be transformative. I believe that we, as academics, as thinkers, we have to contribute with the evolution of humanity. And I know I get in troubles. I know this word evolution is really taboo in many of the social sciences, and especially in anthropology. But I actually have, I'm not ashamed of reusing this term. And I do this thanks to my actually engagement in spiritual practices such as tantra, yoga, which actually have helped me to incorporate in my life, in the way I experience my existence, incorporate the spiritual parts of life, which is completely, I believe, missing in much of the epistemology of, like the epistemological aspect of, doing research, but also in the ontology of knowledge, and in the way we perceive and we look at knowledge, and also in the way scholars, academics in general, live their own lives and perceive even the experience, live the experience of being academics.
And on the term evolution, if I may just quickly add that, so what I'm understanding, and this is certainly my personal understanding also vis-a-vis knowledge and life as such, right? The sort of life of an academic engaging in knowledge production, what have you, is just one aspect of life as such, right? And maybe the whole point of life is hopefully, right, the ideal is that it's contributing to our collective, you use the word evolution, and I'm understanding not evolution in a simplistic kind of biological sense, but evolution in a spiritual sense, to our collective awakening. I mean, that was the whole point. Like, I even hesitate to use this kind of language because, the academic training, it leaves deep scars. It leaves deep, wounds or the sort of the disciplinary mechanisms of the Western, secular institution that is the academy, which is a global institution now, right? Very much cannot have space for discussions about spiritual evolution, about collective, consciousness awakening and things like that, right? So, and that's really what you're speaking to, right? And unabashedly, like you're not ashamed to talk.
No, I'm not ashamed.
You don't see that there's a contradiction between the two.
There is not a contradiction at all, and there is, that's also one of the reasons why I started to really become very disenchanted with academic life, academic production of knowledge, because I feel and I felt, I've been feeling that the way we look at reality, if it's only based on the physical materialist, face facade, side, then we're missing much deeper understanding of the world, of reality of life. And because academic, of course, there are exceptions to this, because, I'm sure, theologians and philosophers, and even some anthropologists might have, might go beyond, the kind of face value of things, and, just the facade and the most, evident aspect of reality. But nevertheless, much of scientific knowledge, and especially, hard science knowledge, is based on, the idea that we should just explore, experiment, and observe what is visible through our senses, 5 senses. Well, I believe, and this is what spiritual practices have actually taught me, that there's so much more beyond this reality. And so I believe that we should really take, actually put an effort into, if not explaining, at least trying to understand even the invisible aspects of, of reality. And, anthropology recently has been focusing a lot on, the anthropology of the senses, right? So it's still, but it's something that, even if they're trying to make a difference to what has been explored so far, you're still looking at, the reality through the 5 senses. You're not trying to actually even admit or take into account that there is something beyond those 5 senses. They need to be addressed, because that part is part, it's that those aspects are part of our lives, of the existence. But if I address these issues in an academic context with, people would laugh at me, because you're not supposed to address these issues in an academic context. And so it is hard, and that's why I'm actually considering even being a scholar outside of the formal academic context. Because also this is related to the way, you produce knowledge. You have to produce knowledge, and the way you disseminate your knowledge has to go through peer reviewing and has to be approved, by publishing houses and editors. And someone would never be interested in publishing something that, takes into account those aspects that I was trying to, I was pointing to.
Well, I think it's very brave, and it's very, very necessary, and absolutely imperative to think along the terms that you're thinking. Can you speak, continue to speak on these points a little bit? It's necessary because I think some of the greatest thinkers throughout history, this is not an exaggeration, they thought outside of mainstream institutions, right? I mean, you're Italian yourself, so Italy has an incredible history of brilliant Renaissance thinkers, people who really shook things up. Sometimes they weren't, formally, affiliated with institutions. Please speak a little bit to that. And I'm going to be right back, because my darling dog, Aria, whom you know and others know, she's barking. But I'm within earshot. I'll be right back. Please continue. Please speak to some of the attitudes that you're bringing. Speak a little bit to the important role that the Renaissance has played through history, and we know a little bit about that, but how some Renaissance thinkers, if I'm not mistaken, have inspired you, and you yourself have a very rich educational background, through the Italian schooling system. I'll be right back. Forgive me. She's being annoying. You know how she can be. Sorry.
Maybe I'll wait for you to come back.
No. Continue, because we're live. So you'll continue, and this has happened before. So keep going, and it's not going to affect. It's not going to affect the show. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Speak as you would to a room of students, and whom you may not necessarily be seeing because they're on Zoom. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, how has the Italian Renaissance in some ways impacted on the way I go about doing research, being a scholar, producing knowledge, and relating to other people, other human beings in other world, other life worlds. Well, first of all, the Renaissance had a very holistic approach to knowledge. If you look at the big geniuses of the Renaissance, of the Italian Renaissance, they had a profound understanding of man in all these components. Look at what Leonardo did. Leonardo had huge, very profound understanding of the the man's biology, but also this, more spiritual aspects. A Renaissance artist will be trained in, painting, architecture, history, even, anatomy. He would have a holistic, really, understanding of man, and I must say that actually the way the Italian educational system was in the past organized reflected remotely this approach, and now it's been lost over the last 20 years. This is being lost because he was kind of more standardized according to more the European standards, and knowledge is becoming more and more, specialized, while the Renaissance approach was, having a moralistic and approach towards understanding, human life, but also other forms of lives on Earth, and and in a way, I try to bring this holistic approach also when I went, to Australia. When I started my master's degree there, and I did my PhD, where again in that institution, the ANU, was great. It's a great institution, but again, knowledge was very specialized, and I felt actually that the background I had somehow built and brought with me from Italy helped me a lot in the way I understood, the way I approached even anthropology itself, the way I approached my way of doing research, when I was in the field. So now that I've returned back to Italian academia, I feel that there is something lacking because this holistic approach is being lost. I feel that sometimes,
and it's also sorry to interrupt, it's almost like a swear word, right? It's like people, maybe for the most part, oftentimes they look down on people like yourself, myself, if we use even words like holistic, right? Even though it's without a shred of doubt, we are these complex, organisms, deeply sort of enmeshed in complex systems. But even within ourselves, like there's so many countless, infinite, almost different sort of chemicals and parts and things like that have this functioning, this holistic functioning together. And yet, because of the history of the development of modern science, especially, right, there's this hyper specialization which has now spread to all the disciplines, which can be and has been very productive as far as coming up with cool new technologies and insights and things like that. But what happens to the very psyche, to the human psyche, when we become hyper specialized? We start to ourselves, right, because our knowledges inform us by the same token. It's not like knowledge is something that we are looking out onto or discovering out there in the physical world, but it's whatever lens we place on reality speaks back to us, right? Reality with a capital R, as it were. Reality speaks back to us according to that lens, according to the questions that we pose. So if we think of reality in these hyper-specialized, atomized ways, we ourselves then start to see ourselves as atomized and disconnected. And is it any wonder that we're suffering so deeply as a species from extreme sort of disaffection, disconnection, alienation, on and on?
Yeah, well, I think it is a reflection, because knowledge produces the way we see and we perceive of reality that is around us. And I agree with what you just said. We, as humanity, we are more and more disconnected, not only with our mates, but more and more, of course, disconnected from nature, from the natural process of of being, and we disconnected from the laws of nature. And I'm not saying this in a new age kind of attitude. I'm saying this in a very also rational way, not only spiritually. And we need to find this connection. We need to find connection with nature. As I said, connect with the moon, connect with the sun. And certainly, if you're an academic, you're not taught to do anything like this in academic training. And in order to do this again, I had to, when I came back to Sardinia after 20 years, Sardinia is my homeland, I actually started studying with a shaman. And my mother would laugh at me, say, "I can't believe you've got a PhD in anthropology, you're such an educated, highly educated person, and now you're actually studying with a shaman. Aren't you ashamed?" And I said, "No, I'm not ashamed, because actually the shaman taught me so much about numerology, about other ways and methods to look at reality and to look at human behavior that anthropology had never taught me before. Anthropology had taught me to look at rituals, by deconstructing the rituals, analyzing all different phases of a ritual, trying to find meanings of rituals, but has never taught me how to experience the ritual within myself. And I had to go into, now Tantra is doing this to me, because Tantra, the kind of Tantra I practice is the Shakta tradition. And I mean, all Tantra traditions share the idea of, you have to experience the God, or in the case of Tantra Shakta, the goddess's essence within you. And unless you do this, you can't really somehow fully experience life. And as an academic, you're not taught to do this. And I never, I had never felt this when I was simply just doing academic work in a more, kind of standard way.
Speaking of, the study of religious phenomena, right, in the world, as a religionist myself, trained at Columbia, amongst other places, like the object of study, right? That phrase in and of itself is problematic, but we need not get stuck there. But that's the way it's used, right? That's how the language is used. So the object of study is never taken as being serious, a serious, as it were, way of understanding the world. It's not, right? I mean, say shaman, it's taken almost like an artifact. It's taken as following on from sort of materialistic philosophy, right? It's an object, right? We study it as an object, completely divorced from it, right? It doesn't have any real bearing in the world, apart from being almost like a curiosity that we study as these enlightened, evolved, sort of Western subjects, right? So it's so religion, qua religion, is really only the concern of theology departments. And theology, who takes theology seriously, right? Could you say a little bit about shamanism? Because I mean, I know you've studied shamanism more seriously and systematically than myself. I've sort of dabbled a little bit into it, inevitably, just by virtue of being interested in religious phenomena as such. But could you say a little bit about, in sort of broad brushstroke terms, how the shaman views reality? What's the shaman's relationship to reality? Speaking of, I mean, enchanting, right, or re-enchanting the academy, for the shaman, reality is already enchanted, right? So could you speak a little bit to that, please?
Well, a shaman, a shaman always live in an enchanted dimension, even, either when he is or she is in a more static state, or when is actually he or she is living life in an static state. The shaman is a medium between the other world and this world, and is in deep connection with actually the different aspects of nature that he sees embodied in in animals, in plants, in mostly in natural like elements, and he's the one who, or she's the one who has to kind of communicate between these two worlds. So in the sense is he or she is a medium. And the interesting thing is that many anthropologists who study shamanism don't take shamans seriously. So they're very interested, curious about, maybe the charisma of the shaman, the way the shaman, the social role the shaman plays in society, the ways, is the role of the shaman often is socially constructed, the way, even witchcraft is socially constructed. For instance, the early structural functionalists, the British anthropologists try to do this, but they actually take distance from shamans and try. Even Levi-Strauss did this, despite his sympathy for shamans, but deeply he never really take shamans seriously. Very few anthropologists, there are some who actually have become shamans themselves, who have really understood the essence of being a shaman, and actually the power that a shaman can have, and the way a shaman can really impact reality, because they're able to manipulate reality and to change reality through changing the energy. The whole idea, I mean, this is another chapter, right? What is energy and how we handle energy in our lives. And if you talk about energy, in academic context, you have to be very, very careful, unless you're talking about quantum physics or physics. But
of course, interestingly, all the spiritual traditions have using their own language and their own kind of technologies of the self, as it were, they all have a profound understanding of what you just said, right? That things aren't just physical stuff, right? Things are ultimately sort of vibrational, and there's a deep energetic dimension to it, and that people, as they evolve spiritually, they learn how to harness the energy of different things, and they can influence things, as you say, in the case of the shaman, and things aren't sort of just existing in splendid isolation from each other. And as it so happens, right, I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to speak in these terms, but as it so happens, surprise, surprise, no real surprise as far as I'm concerned, the latest sort of cutting edge research, scientific research, right, is proving this to be the case, right? In quantum mechanics, as you say, in quantum physics, we know that every single existing minuscule particle in the universe is impacting upon the rest of the universe. It's completely mind-boggling. It doesn't, I mean, it's literally mind-boggling. We can't understand that, but that's the reality, that we are all part of this complex, infinitely complex whole.
Yes.
So before I interrupted you, you're mentioning about the energetic sort of systems and manipulations, and how in the academy we can't, by and large, talk about these things. Very, very few people are able to or do speak in these terms, for fear primarily of ostracization, right? I mean, we talk in mainstream kind of discourse, right, in kind of low level public discourse, as it were, that it's about science, is about exploration and broadening the horizons of our knowledge and so forth, without recognizing. I mean, you mentioned Levi Strauss, right? How even though he was a serious student and scholar of shamanism, one can say, in a sort of Western academic context, he never really took it seriously, or couldn't, maybe one could say, take it very seriously, because I would argue, and I believe you'd argue also, right? I mean, I don't want to be putting words into your mouth, but again, because we've had occasion to talk about these things at quite some length in the past, this is why I'm able to suggest that you would agree that it's because of the paradigm through which these people, academics, are thinking, right? The paradigm does not allow for the thinking of things other than being a particular way, right? If the window onto the world is of a sort of fixed nature, which I mean, for the purposes of this conversation, let's say it is fixed, it's somewhat malleable, right? But ultimately, there's certain rules that can't be changed. Otherwise, one just steps too far beyond the realms of acceptable discourse. If that window is fixed, then there's only so much of the world that we can see, and we forget, right? Because we're looking out through the window. Because I'm looking out through these glasses, I assume, I forget about the glasses, but we are looking onto the world through a particular lens, right? I mean, hence the very word lens that's used in these contexts.
I think we go into the world, into understanding the world, of course, with somehow preconceived theoretical, even frameworks, and every knowledge is theory led. And I mean, we don't go into learning and understanding something in a void, right? We go by carrying with us the theoretical frameworks that we are embedded in while we are being trained in academia. I mean, this is unavoidable. And that's why that's what I say at the beginning of this talk. Like when I initially went into Laos, and I sat in rituals, and I sat in a temple listening to mantra chanting, I had a completely, of course, different experience of that ritual than I had after had been, I was training, in anthropology and anthropological methods.
It's almost as if because I'm not formally trained as an anthropologist, but I'm heavily influenced by anthropological methods, because my main advisor at Columbia during my PhD was and is an anthropologist. So I can speak a little bit to anthropology, some of the approaches. It's almost as if, right, after you had that formal training, and we already discussed this earlier on, right? You became, and you've already suggested this, that you became less receptive to the kind of deeper spiritual initiatic kind of. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned. I mean, I love the kind of language you used earlier on when you also were describing that first, your first foray into the field, right, into your field work as a field researcher, and that use the word, it's an initiation, right? It's a very kind of important moment. So you were being initiated, but in a different sense, right? In the secular initiated into, and maybe the whole Western educational process that we go through, the disciplinary process, especially at grad school level, especially at the PhD level, right? I mean, I heard it mentioned many years ago, and I didn't really understand what he meant when he said this, by quite a famous whatever Muslim public intellectual, but don't have to mention it. Well, Hamza Yusuf anyway. I heard him mention this. That it's when you go to the PhD level that they really pour the concrete in. Like, I never got that for years, because I mean, I didn't have any. Like, I kind of took it for granted that he knew what he was talking about because he's a smart guy. But having gone through that process and knowing academics, right? Not all. I mean, I'm very lucky, very, very blessed that I know academics like yourself and others who've been themselves blessed, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to think outside of that. But all too often, academics are very rigid in their thinking, right?
So they're afraid of. Maybe they think in other terms, but as you just suggested earlier, we're not allowed to think outside of the box. We're not allowed to even dare to, go back to the more kind of humane and humane experience of certain phenomena. For instance, recently or if they do, they don't want to see it in their own world or in the so-called like more industrialized societies, but they do appreciate it in other contexts, like non-industrialized societies. Like I remember a few months ago, almost a year ago, we had a kind of a conference at Foscari, and there was one presenter from the Department of Asian Studies who was talking about this Neo-Shamanism in Japan, so in contemporary Japan. And she was talking about, how these young Japanese women and men were actually shamans, and they were performing shamanic rituals, and they were often doing it online. So there was this kind of cyber shamanism movement happening. And the reaction of all the people in the audience, made by mostly academics, was like, they were laughing at this phenomenon. They were not taking these shamans seriously. While, if it had been shamanism in remote Laos, in the uplands of Laos, performed by an ethnic Aka man, then they would have, sat and listened silently and maybe with some curiosity, but maybe without judgment. But in the kind of, if this happens, in the contemporary world here in Europe or in countries like Japan, then something that we should respect or take seriously.
That's so interesting. I mean, it's almost as if do you think it has something to do, and maybe it has the different reasons why people, especially the academics in the audience, as you mentioned, reacted as they did to these shamans. Do you think it's partly to do with the fact that anthropology, the history of anthropology, has been, because it was historically engaged in the study of sort of others, right? So it's right, and anthropology is what we use. I mean, it's the anthropologists study other cultures, sociologists study urban, sort of Western urban cultures. So it's just maybe, I mean, it's very interesting, right? So the human experience in some ways, not to go on and on about experience as such, because I think the religious, spiritual, the deeper impulse behind the religious spiritual technologies that we have is not just to have some funky sort of spiritual experience. Yes, that can happen, but that's not the point of it, right? As well as I do, that all teachers worth their salt in any religious spiritual system, they'll say it's not about the experience, it's about something else. I mean, if it's a theocentric sort of worldview, then it's about, ultimately it's about serving God or the gods, or however it's languaged, right? But so not to go on about experience per se, but nevertheless, it's interesting, nevertheless, that for all the talk in sort of mainstream discourse, right, about the importance of recognizing individual experiences, these particular shamans' experiences were sort of written off as being kind of hoax or just cheaters, right?
Denying the possibility that these people might really actually have enough, powers, what the ancient yogis would call, the siddhis, mahasiddhis, to actually make change in people's lives. And because this is what shamans are able to do. And of course, there might be some people who kind of are not real shamans, and they fake, they're fake shamans, and they're really into cheating other people. And of course, it will be up to the followers to discern whether these people is real or not. But this can be applied also to all these modern gurus, or many spiritual, right, leaders and gurus. Because of course, even in spirituality, we shouldn't forget that we should always combine and integrate our intellect and our the more spiritual, let's say, irrational part, emotional part of ourselves. Being spiritual doesn't mean that you completely ignore and get rid of your intellect, your ability to discern, right?
And absolutely,
integrating, the emotional and the rational parts of ourselves, to be
right.
whole beings. We should not forget this. I mean, there is also another, trend, especially in modern gurus, where some gurus suggest, you should forget about your intellect. Your intellect, dissects things, and you makes you prevents you from experience the divine within you fully. I think we should keep both.
I mean, absolutely, I very much agree with that.
We should not discard reasoning and
no, well, I think exactly, because then we run the risk, absolutely, of charlatans and people who are going to trick other people. I mean, there's a reason, there's a God-given, to use theological language, there's a God-given function that reason has, right? The whole function of reason is to discern. It's a discerning instrument. However, when there's this hyper rationalization, which we witness in the academy, at the university level, and what have you, and in society at large, then we become hyper suspicious of everything, right? Everything is suspect. Everything is, made up, or how can that possibly be? Because we're so caught up in this sort of limited sphere, ultimately.
Yeah, socially constructed. In anthropology classes, whatever phenomena you're exploring, where there is, political economy related issues, or where there is a ritual, there's always some social construction of that.
Right. Everything is a social construct.
And it's always social, because everything is, the idea of the state, the nation state is socially constructed. The idea of ethnicity is socially constructed.
Which has truth to it. Yes, but not yes and right. You're right. That's not the whole, because
because even in the construction, or even the existence of a state, of the idea of an ethnic group and ethnicity, there is a lot of attachment that comes from within you, from your
exactly.
heart.
Well, and
So we should not
right,
neglect this. You know,
right,
especially there are, you know, a nation state is, you know, it's constructed through language, you know, through different.
But then it takes on a reality of its own, a very palpable reality. And to say that everything is a social construct, maybe even saying that everything is a social construct is a social construct constructed by the academy.
That's it.
Well, I mean, again, I'm very grateful. I mean, I haven't mentioned in the course of today's discussion, but in general, I've had occasion to mention it, and this is true. I'm very grateful for the training I've received. I'm genuinely grateful. I mean, it's really equipped me, you know, to think in sophisticated ways, which I most probably wouldn't be able to engage in. But, you know, and then Columbia is famous for, you know, being very postmodern, and the whole kind of social constructionist stuff. But to get stuck there, this is the problem. Because then what do we have nothing to build on. If everything is a social construct, is the floor, is the ground I'm standing in on a social construct as well, right? Like, you know, race and religion and, you know, and identity and gender, every single thing, biology is a social construct, right? I mean, you know, the sort of the Butlerian, Judith Butler sort of argument. I mean, I understand the logic. There's a type of logic to it. It's not completely insane. There's a deep, and there's a history that, you know, there's a history to how that type of discussion came about as well. But to anyway, you see what I'm saying? It's I think going back to your earlier word, which is a word that I happen to use a lot, the sort of trying to bring about an integrated, holistic approach to life and living and being and witnessing and interacting, right? Reintegrating the different aspects.
But even, you know, in the way we produce knowledge in academia, if academia wants to have a future in many ways, it has to integrate these two aspects. You know, spirituality and science have to come together. Otherwise, it would be completely useless for the, again, awakening of humanity, you know, in a higher terms. We're not going to help much humanity if we get stuck into the physical, materialist aspects of the world and of life, because we won't make any progress. And you know, and you realize that actually many sages and spiritual leaders, like amongst, you know, whom are, for instance, yogis, they came to many conclusions that modern science, that is, you know, notoriously based on just, you know, the pure materialist and, you know, physical aspect of reality, hasn't grasped even like one, you know, single part yet of it. And yogis have understood much more of, you know, of the universe and of the human body, of the human, you know, of the brain. I mean, the brain is one of the parts of the body that is still, you know, modern science has understood the least, right? But actually, if you read, you know, the old Indian, you know, scriptures, you see so much understanding about the way, you know, the intellect works, the brain works, that we have still no idea.
Can you start? I mean, before I interrupted you earlier, you when you were shifting from talking about shamanism to your training now in tantra and the type of yoga-based tantra. Can you speak a little bit to that and the kind of understanding of reality that metaphysical perspective brings to the fore? And while you're doing that, I'm going to have to tend to Ari again very quickly. I think she's been having diarrhea lately. Speaking of enchanting and disenchanting, like, you know, she keeps me grounded. Right? This dog can be super annoying, but so please, I'm not too far away. Please continue. You know, I'll be back very shortly. Okay. So yoga's understanding of reality, how that can help us, but both, you know, in terms of, you know, the human being, the different gradations and levels of reality, the cosmos, science, yogic science, healing, because you are in a very real sense a teacher of those things yourself. So
yes. Well, first of all, the whole yogic understanding of reality, and is that we as humans are really a microcosm and a reflection of the macrocosm. So we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And there is really a sort of correspondence in the way our body, our microcosm works, and the way the larger macrocosm functions. And in a way, all the yogic practices are about try to align ourselves while we experience this body in this existence, in a certain existence, to align ourselves with the, with the same rules and the same functioning mechanisms of the larger macrocosm. So, for instance, yoga envisions that our spine is actually the reflection and of this Mount Meru, which is considered the center of the world. Also, Buddhism takes on this idea. And so the whole yogic physical practice, but also breathing practice, is based on aligning the spine, because through the spine flows the major, part of of the prana, of energy within us. And if the spine, so Mount Meru, is bent, or there are some kind of blockages, then the whole system, our pranic system, our energetic system, would function accordingly. So again, it's the correspondence is kind of a correlative understanding. There's a correlation between our body, our microcosm, and the macrocosm, aligning these two worlds. And the ultimate goal is, of course, to transcend our physical body and then go back to to the ultimate consciousness, or the self. The whole Indian philosophy, it's focused on the notion of self, the individual self, and how we relate to the larger self with the capital S, and how we can return to this, which is how we can bypass. How can we reach the so-called moksha? Moksha is the term for liberation, somehow disentanglement from something. So we are entangled in our body, in our ego, in this existence. In the whole idea of this practice is in different ways. Different schools of yoga and tantra have tried in different ways to reach moksha. The goal is the same, but it's the means that we use to reach that ultimate goal that differ in the different schools of yoga and tantra. And there are some. This is like a we can do through renunciation to the world, to like our worldly needs and desires. This is an example of this, the renunciants, so the sadhus, right, who renounce to the world and then go and give up basically everything, any pleasure, and then try to experience, the divine through renunciation and purification. You can do it like, for instance, Tantra, or some schools of Tantra actually talk about the opposite. You experience life even through, even through pleasure, body pleasure, sexual pleasure. Well, often in yoga or more traditional yoga, this was not contemplated, in the sense that in many of the yoga schools, you would have, you would follow more the so-called, brahmacharya path, which is, renouncing to sexual pleasure and worldly pleasures in general. But again, the ultimate goal is the same. It's about transcending the body and transcending your ego and reunite. Of course, we all know that the root of the term yoga is yug, to yoke, to unite. By unite, first you integrate and unite all the different levels of your existence. Yoga, the yogic physiology, sees the body as made of different layers, 5 layers, and we have to integrate those layers from the physical to the astral, what is called energetic, and then the mental, and then the more spiritual layer. And through yoga, the different practices of yoga, we have to integrate these different layers. And then we have to transcend. It's about transcending the body, the different body, the physical body, and then the other layers, until you elevate yourself and you enter the state of so-called samadhi or mahasamadhi, and that's when you finally reach the full union, emerging with the ultimate reality. You become, you go back to being what you were before you incarnated. You were incarnated in this body.
There's you just reminded me with your last point. Beautiful description there. Thank you so much for that. You just reminded me of this Buddhist koan I remember reading a few years ago. It completely blew my mind, as Buddhist koans I want to do. And the koan was and is, what is your face before you were born? Which is deep, right? Not even was, like you said, was, that would be hard enough. But what is your face before you were born? Could you speak a little bit to that? Because I think that that koan captures the last point that you made, and maybe that koan summarizes in many ways, right, the deep imperative of all spiritual traditions, rediscovering our original face, which has always been and always will be. Just happens to be through social conditioning and education and the conditions of existence, the modes of subsistence, getting caught up in all of that we forget, we lose sight of our original face.
Well, our original face is the divine face, and which we forget once we become, we reincarnate into a body. And my Tantra teacher says often, people forget who they are. You forget who you are because of the past karma. You forget who you are because of the experiences when you were a child, traumas, before, because of the way you socialize into into this world. And you have to look inside within yourself to really see who you really are. And that's why meditation, even deep breathing, and connecting daily with your deep self, it's essential in order to see your real face, or what your real face was or is now and what was before you were born. And but a lot of people, for instance, my Tantra teacher claims that there's so many, we are so many. It's very interesting, his understanding of, overpopulation in the world. He says we are so many because too many people forget where they came from, forget what the divine essence is, and they deny, they reject the idea of returning to the Father, to going back to the self. And I kind of, of course, I used to try to understand overpopulation in more kind of rationalist terms in the past, political economy and medicine. But recently I started to appreciate this theory of people denying, rejecting the idea of returning to God, to the Father. And that's why, there's so many people being reborn and wanting to come back, dying and wanting to come back, leaving the body and coming back to this world. So yeah, I like this understanding of overpopulation in the world.
That's a very, I think I remember you mentioning that perspective to me before, and it's a hard one to wrap one's mind around, and maybe it's not meant to be understood on a normal rational level.
You don't understand that of course, in a rational level.
No. It's a super rational,
improvement, of course, of the living conditions and the science and all this. Okay, you can make that understanding of a population,
but it makes sense in that sort of karmic cyclical sense, that if seen through the lens, right, of rebirth, birth and rebirth, and karma, and the sort of Hindu sort of the Indic cosmology, then if our ultimate goal is to not be reborn, but to, as you're saying, right, to paraphrase, to return to our source, but we keep
coming back.
We keep coming back, like, instead of, so the cycle is going, there's your cat, the wheel is turning, and at one point we're supposed to get off the wheel to return to pure enlightenment, but we keep coming back, and so many, and that's a very profound way of looking at things, because it's true. I mean, with the as it were, the thickening of reality that we're experiencing in the last days, right? In this period of Kali Yuga, it's interesting. Speaking, that's not Kali, that's Vishnu. The other one's called Kali. But
one of my cats is called Vishnu. The other is called Kali.
Well, see, they are already enlightened. Cats are already enlightened, right?
Oh, they are, absolutely. They teach me so much about,
They're already enlightened. They're already enchanted. They never became disenchanted. But maybe it's interesting. I was going to suggest that all the traditions have this notion of the end days. Of course, famously, perhaps, Hinduism has, famously because it's entered mainstream lexicon, even Joe Rogan, right? The famous, as far as we know, atheist, not in a simplistic sense, he's a very interesting guy. But even he's referring to the Kali Yuga, that we've entered the Kali Yuga now. So famously Kali Yuga, but in Christianity, of course, the end days, in Islam, the end, Buddha, I think in Buddhism, they have this notion of the Kalki avatar who's supposed to come. So in Christianity, Christ is meant to return. Even in Islam, Christ is meant to return. In Hinduism, who's meant to return in the end? Like, who's supposed to usher in the golden age? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Oh, that's okay. But
in Buddhism, you would have all these people who achieve enlightenment, who might, not return to the bodhisattvas, who might not return, who don't return to the self, and stay in this world to save humanity. In Hinduism, I guess, I mean, the way I understand it is, is your personal journey to God and that you have to do it.
Can you clarify something for me, Antonella? Sorry, it just occurred to me, because this is not my area of specialization by any means, and I think I remember coming across this, but I'm a little rusty on the details. So is the Kali Yug the age of Kali, and what does that mean?
No, it's not the age of Kali. I mean, they have the same root, because actually as the Kali is the notion of time, okay? So actually the root of this is time, okay? So Kali, actually, even the goddess, is linked to the idea of time, to the notion of time. And Yug is the type of time, that we are in. But I'm also not myself very kind of familiar in this kind of.
That's okay. Yeah. So how then? And because this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is of course a vast area of exploration and discussion and meditation and working towards what we've been talking about today, what you've very kindly been leading discussion today on today. That is the re-enchantment of the academy, or in some ways one could say the re-enchantment or re-enchanting education itself, right? Because it means remembering why we're meant to learn, remembering the function of knowledge, remembering the function, therefore, of ourselves, right? If we remind ourselves of the original function of knowledge, and if we are shaped inevitably as socialized beings, right, with very, very rare exceptions, and with very rare exceptions, some people, well, actually, I mean, it's not that rare still. Illiteracy is a quite an extensive problem globally, but I was going to say, with rare exceptions, people can attain enlightenment while still being while still not having any formal education. Nevertheless, if we say, for argument's sake, because that becomes too unwieldy otherwise, if we are for the most part educated, right, even just by virtue of being socialized beings, we're educated, right? And if the real function of education is to enlighten us, then our real function is to attain enlightenment, right? All those things follow. So what are some steps we can take, in your estimation, as far as reintegrating knowledge? And it's interesting. I mean, for me, it's no real surprise, because the historic Islamic intellectual tradition very much speaks to this. The Blessed Prophet, of Islam, from a Muslim point of view, he said it, and we have to remind ourselves when he said this. He mentioned this over 14 centuries ago, which is a very big deal. He spelled it out. He said, seeking knowledge, talabatul ilm, right? The quest for knowledge is obligatory. It's a religious obligation. And then he specifically spelled it out. He could have just said it's obligatory on every Muslim, but he said it's obligatory on every Muslim, male and female. This is 14 centuries ago, where we're talking about, rights today, women's rights. Like there are issues in the Muslim community today, but I mean, he was really a man way, way, way ahead of his time. If we look historically, how women fared over 14 centuries ago, even a couple of centuries ago in the West. But so knowledge has always been given a tremendous premium in the Islamic tradition. And knowledge, the function of knowledge has always been to reorient us vis-a-vis the divine. Like knowledge otherwise...
Yeah, this is what it should be about. Even in the contemporary world, that is highly rationalized world, we have to remind ourselves that this is the ultimate. If our ultimate goal is to go back, return to the self, to consciousness, we have to make academic, the production of knowledge within the academy part of this process. So you say how, which step? First step, less self-centered academic production of knowledge, which is all based about, my name is on that publication, my name is on that book, if I publish on this, highly high standard journal, I can go up, with my career. I can build my career. I mean, I know it's very idealistic, but really it should be about, I produce knowledge so that, I can help humanity to elevate itself. How does this knowledge going to help, the collective, and rather than myself? Of course, you're part of it in the sense, it is very idealistic to say, oh, okay, I forget about myself, but it's about, seeing yourself as a means. I'm just a means, divine means to actually help others to achieve, the ultimate goal. That's the way I perceive, I see my life not only as an academic, but in whatever I do. So your work should be service to the divine. That's the way I see it. And I'm sure a lot of people will laugh about this, especially people who are academics, who are not, maybe atheists or agnostic, and might not believe in this, but that's the way I see it.
Well, the interesting thing, I again, I appreciate everything you've been saying, and that really resonates with me so much, that it should be about service. The interesting thing is that studies reveal, because we live, I mean, the secular system is such, right, that it wants to know everything, right? It could be said from a theological point of view, right, that theologically speaking, right, we know that the devil, as it were, the archetype of this sort of negative force and negative life force, almost, it's anti-life, this negative force energy in the world, it seeks to ape God in all its, so God is all-knowing, excuse me, all-seeing. This demonic system wants to be all-knowing and all-seeing, and so therefore it studies everything it possibly can in the most minute details, right? So in any case, there's some good things that come out of it. And what I was going to mention is that they know through studies, right? I know in the American context that after a certain income bracket, I think the amount that I remember hearing a few years ago was 70,000, and I forget the kind of context, like what how big the family was, and what if it's 2.4 children, whatever. But the figure that I remember hearing was after 70,000, that sort of income bracket, the sort of happiness, the graph, if you chart the happiness graph, it actually levels off, unless it only sort of goes upwards again if there's a very serious element of service, that people are doing things for others. So we're hardwired, I would say, by God, fundamentally, that God has made us as deeply social, interconnected beings, because that's the reality of nature. Nature is not red in tooth and claw. Nature is very cooperative. I mean, some of the most interesting studies are revealing that. So even if we go from that perspective, it makes logical sense to be in a state of service. And from a spiritual sense, of course, from a theological sense, it makes sense because, I mean, that's how God made us. God actually increases us, however we understand God, whether we understand God in a more monotheistic sense, in a more sort of through a Hindu lens, whatever that means, whatever our understanding is. And Hindu cosmology, I've had the great benefit, I've been blessed to have studied a little bit. It's a vast ocean. I mean, it's vast. One could spend one's entire life and not studying it and still not scratch the surface. This is true for any metaphysical system. This is just the case. But it's a very, very rich, very sophisticated system, as you know. So whatever the language we use to understand God, I think God rewards us and increases us when we seek to genuinely serve people, not to become complete renunciants necessarily, right? We have to live in the world as well. But I don't know, I think a special kind of joy comes into life as facilitations come from places that we would never have imagined. That's just the way of the universe. I really believe that.
I think so. As long as this service is deeply felt, within us, in our heart, as long as service is not something you use to show off, like to others, or you see how good I am to to serve. It's really, it's not only about serving, but about how deeply you feel about, serving others. Again, connecting yourself to others through service.
Well, I mean, the question of why we do things, I think, is even like intentionality is even veiled from ourselves. Only my intentions, your intentions, only God knows the truth of your intentions. Even you yourself are not 100% clear on your intentions. That's just the reality. This is why in all the spiritual traditions, I mean, I can speak quite authoritatively in the Islamic context, the Blessed Prophet, who from one point, from one theological point of view, he was inerrant. He didn't and yet, and this is the punchline. That's not the punchline. The punchline is he asked for forgiveness of God 70 times a day, and he was asked why he did that. And if I'm not misremembering, he said, "Should I not be grateful to my Lord?" So sometimes asking forgiveness is recognizing our mortality, recognizing our frailty, recognizing our fallibility as opposed to our infallibility. We're all deeply fallible, deeply flawed beings. However, if we have the right intentions, if we try, at the end of the day, all we can do, the best that we can do is try our best. That's it. Like, no, God doesn't expect anything more of us. It's society and people who have higher expectations. Expectation is the killer, right? This is in Buddhism. It's like that's the source of misery, right? Attachment, because it breeds attachment. And so, look, I think if we serve to the best of our ability, and again, God knows the reality of it. God knows the reality of it. I am myself veiled from my own intentions. It's something in Sufi metaphysics, the deep Sufi sort of sages, mystical masters through the ages, they in one school of thought, it says that one should take account of oneself at the end of every night. Like, why did I do what I did? What were my intentions? And then ultimately leave it up to God. There's one. Ultimately, God is deeply merciful. This is that's the school of thought I tend to believe in. There's another tradition, Islamic tradition, where it said that on the day of judgment, everyone will be brought before God with their deeds, right? And as people are being judged, they'll have piles of deeds put before them, right? Good deeds. And people will say, well, but I never did that stuff. Right, and either the angels or God, I forget, right, will say, well, but you intended to do. So even intending to do something good is something very powerful, because intention gives birth to everything. Like, intention is the mother and father of all goodness. But I think we need to, as people, hopefully with who are intending to do good things, or trying to do good things. At the end of the day, without God's facilitation, we can't do anything. We can't do nothing. We can't even take a single breath without the divine facility, right? We should seek to support each other in doing what the good that we're trying to do. Because what I'm trying to do, I just know, factually speaking, I don't care what people think about my intentions. Like, I know what I'm doing. I've made unbelievable sacrifices, just factually speaking. I've made sacrifices to the point where it really affected me psychologically, deep sacrifices. Because I could have been a university professor, literally, speaking of the re-enchantment of the academy, like with a PhD from Columbia University, I was pretty much guaranteed a job as a professor. And a little bit about my background, so I don't need to tell you too much about this, but just for other people's benefit, if it's of benefit. Like, I decided not to do that. I didn't have a plan B. All I knew, I didn't have a clear-cut plan B. I knew that I did not want to become, I knew that I didn't do a PhD just for the sake of becoming a professor because it sounds good. That was never my intention. My intention was always to serve. This is something that I've been, like, this is something, a ball that I set in motion over 20 years ago. 20 years ago is a very freaking long time to be bringing something into fruition, and it's happening as we speak, and it's going to continue to happen. And people may like it, people may not like it, but I know what the energy we bring to the table, and people like yourself and others, like if we can collaborate, and have these very important discussions, very unusual discussions. These discussions are not being had. They're just not. I know this for a fact, because people don't, even people who want to talk about these things literally don't have the intellectual tools to be taken seriously. Like they wouldn't be able to sustain a conversation for 10 minutes along these lines.
Because, within the academic discourse, these are not topics that are addressed. Maybe they are addressed in the corridors somewhere, between, especially PhD students who complain about, the mechanics of academia. But yeah, certainly. But we need to find platforms like this one, the one you set up, where you founded, to discuss more of these issues. They need to be addressed, because academia doesn't change just by simply sitting at the conferences and discussing topics in the traditional way. Changes happen through this kind of more even informal discussions, and through even alternative outlets, right? Alternative medium. Yeah.
I hadn't forgot to unmute myself. Well, so Antonella, as always, genuinely, it's always a real pleasure talking to you. We've been talking, we've covered a lot of very, very important aspects today. Some foundational, one could say, some foundational theoretical dimensions, right? Because in order to even, I remember there's this interview between Chomsky, not to go on and on about Chomsky, because he recently made some highly problematic comments. We don't need to go in, we don't need to delve there. We could put it down to his old age. He's pretty old at this point, right? But the old Chomsky, I think, was very different from today's Chomsky. Who knows? Nevertheless, in one of these interviews, he was asked, this is going back some decades now, right? So he was like, why don't you speak more appear on TV news interviews and things like that, right? And the response, that one of the responses that he made, which I thought was very telling and sort of applicable to what, the point that what we're talking about right now, the point that I want to make, which is, he said that, look, in these kind of TV little short news segments, you have like 3 minutes in which to make your point. And yet, in order to even begin to speak, I have to clear out all this, I have to create this intellectual space. Like I have to lay the foundations, I'm paraphrasing, but I have to lay theoretical foundations so that I can even begin to speak, so that people can even make sense of what I'm talking about. And clearly that can't be done in 3 minutes. So the point that I want to make is, I feel that what we've done today, at the very least, is to begin to lay some critical theoretical foundations on which to then build and to talk further, and to like genuinely, like, again, I'm very much committed to the project of education. Like for me, education is, if done well, done with the correct intention, and it can literally transform lives inside out, right? In terms of how, not just materially, yes, but materially, spiritually, interpersonally, and education is light. I mean, knowledge is power, but more than that, I believe it's light. So I'm very much committed in my own sort of humble way. But if we can collaborate on something like this, I personally, I know I put this to you before separately, but I'm going to put you on the spot live. But because I really like, if we can have a sort of series of discussions on this, because it's not a topic that can ever be exhausted just by one conversation, because it's like trying to rethink how we do things in the academy.
I'll think about it. I consider. Let's evaluate this, later on. Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
all right, Antonella, well, regardless.
very pleased that we have at least started, you say, to lay the foundations.
Good. Well, no, this is very important. I'm very pleased and very grateful that we finally did this, because we've been talking about doing something like this for some time. I know you're very busy. You have a very busy schedule. Nevertheless, onwards and upwards. And well, look, even Vishnu is like, yes.
Vishnu, hungry, and he wants to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Antonella. Thank you, Vishnu. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Hassan, for having me in.
Oh, you're most welcome. Okay.
Thank you.
God bless. God bless. Oh, Vishnu, look at Vishnu. So cute. All right, guys. Bye now.
Bye.
God bless.
Bye.